we need to make sure that you're all set up to code in Python on your computer. Now, if you've already done Python coding before and you already have a setup that you're happy with, stick with it. I'm a pragmatist when it comes to what tools we use. You'll often hear people tell you, this editor is better than this one, or this setup is the one you should use and don't use that setup. They're just tools. Let's not worry too much about the tools. Let's focus on the coding. So if you have a setup you're happy with, go ahead with it. There's no good or bad here. There's just different tools for the job. But if you are brand new to Python and you don't have Python on your computer, you need to install it and you need to start somewhere. Or if you'd rather follow along using the same tools that I will be using, then this video will take you through the steps you need. There are 2 bits of software you're going to need to install on your computer. Firstly, we need Python itself, the language. We need to download and install Python so that your computer understands the language. But then we also need an editor, something to write Python in. It's a bit like when you open an editor to write in English. You may use Google Docs or Microsoft Word or Markdown, whatever it might be. Those are the editors to write in English, and likewise we need an editor to write in Python. There are many. I'll be recommending one specifically. Good. Let's get going then. The first thing we need to do is to install Python. So we can go to python.org. All the links that you'll need, I'll put them below this video in the notes section. I'll put all the links so you'll be able to click on them there. So at python.org, which is the official site for the Python language, you'll be able to go to downloads and you'll find a link to download the current version of Python. At the time of recording, this is Python 3.12. It might be a later version. It doesn't really matter too much. As long as you don't have a really old version. If you already have a version of Python on your computer, if it's much older than 3.12, I would recommend installing the latest one. Once you click on this, it will download the installer. You'll open the installer, you run through it, go through. My advice is whenever you have a choice to make when you're installing these things, always pick the default options. It makes life easier. And then you can always change things later on. And once you've gone through the installer, what happens will depend ever so slightly whether you're on a Mac or on a Windows or on a Linux. But you'll have an installer, you'll download it. Once it finishes, you will have Python installed on your computer, which means that the language is there. But that's not enough because we also need the editor to write our Python in. As I mentioned before, there are many, but I'm going to recommend using one called PyCharm. So if we go to the website from the company, JetBrains.com, as always, the link is below this video, so you'll be able to get the link there. PyCharm is the editor we're going to be using. Now, the first one that's shown to you that's very prominent is the professional edition. You can see why. This is the paid one, but you do not need the professional version. Scroll down and you'll find the community edition. Bear in mind that these websites change from time to time, so it may look a bit different. But look for the community edition. This is the free version. It's more than enough for anything you will need for now and for the foreseeable future. So you'll find the download button. Depending on what operating system you're on, it will ask you to download the version that's suitable for your operating system, of course. And the community edition, so again, do not get the professional one. There's no need to pay for this. If later on then you become professional, you want the professional version, leave that till later. Download the community edition. As before, once it downloads, depending on what operating system you're on, it will be a bit different. Run the installer, choose the default options for the time being. And once it's all installed, you have got Python, the language, and PyCharm, the editor. So let's see how we're going to use them. So once you've got Python and PyCharm installed, you will never need to launch Python directly. As long as you have Python on your computer, that's all you need. We'll do all the setup via PyCharm, the editor you've just downloaded. So let's start by launching PyCharm. And I have multiple versions there, but you'll have the community edition. And once it launches, you'll end up with a welcome window that looks like this. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be creating a new project. Now, a project is a folder that contains all the files that belong to the same project, hence the name. For the purposes of this course, my advice would be either to just create one project for the entire course and put all the files within that project. If you want, you can do one per chapter, but really it's good enough to have one project for the entire course. So do not create a new project every time. There, once I create a new project, give it any name you want. You can see after the file path, it was untitled. I'm going to give it a better name. We'll stick with the defaults for everything else. You can see the option where it's going to tell us what environment we want. We'll just stick with the default one, new environment. An environment is where Python is effectively, and ignore what virtual env is. This is something we'll talk about in the future. Make sure you should only have one version of Python, but if like me you have many, choose the latest one. And if something doesn't work there are ways of dealing with it. Get in touch with me and I'll help you. And once we're ready, we can create the project. And this is what the PyCharm window looks like. So we've got a project, we're ready to start coding. Now, I'll show you a few things on how to get started, but as we start going through the lessons, I'll show you a bit more on how to use PyCharm. Good. Once any scroll bar at the bottom has finished, you're ready to start. So the first place we can go is in the sidebar, and always make sure that the name of your project is selected. That means that when we open a file, which we're going to do in a second, it goes in there. Now, in the file menu, do not choose new project. We've already created a project. We want new ... This will give us a window. Once we click on it, it will give us a window. You may be tempted to choose file. After all, we want to open a file. But don't pick the one that just says file. If you scroll down, you'll see Python file. This means that we'll create a file that's actually a Python script with the right extensions and all. Give it a name. I'm going to call it getting started. Avoid spaces in names. You can, but it's best to sort of use underscores or just no spaces at all. And now we've got an empty file ready for us to start coding. That's where we're going to be writing our Python code as we start in our courses. That is not Python code, but we'll be writing real Python code shortly. And on the left, you'll see the sidebar, which shows you where the project is. Ignore the folder that says VM. That's the virtual environment. That's where your Python for this project is. But below that, you'll find all the files you're creating. In this case, there's getting started, but you will have more files as you go along. I prefer to close the sidebar just so I have more space for coding. Now, once we have written some code, we haven't in this case, we will need to run the code. And the first time we have a file, we're going to go to the run menu and choose run ... You may not have run getting started there. If you do, that's great. But if not, the first time we run a file, we go to run ... and click on the name of the file. Once you've done it once, you will be able to run the same file over and over again more easily. So the first time is when we need sort of a bit more hassle to run a file. We have to go to the menu, choose run ... and choose the name of the file. Anyway, that's all for this video. You're all set up with Python and PyCharm. We're ready to actually get started.